bribing doctors to lock his wife of over 30 years inside an asylum. These are Vanderbilt's darkest sins. A ruthless domestic tyrant, yet revered as a nation builder and honored with a grand state funeral. This paradox exposes the facts they tried to hide. He is Cornelius Vanderbilt. Why did the father of American old money use his vast wealth to turn his own family into an inescapable prison? In 1794, Cornelius Vanderbilt was born into the harsh, unforgiving waterfront of Staten Island. He is not a product of refined society. His father, Cornelius Sr., is a struggling, passive ferryman, constantly plagued by minor debts. Young Cornelius despises this lack of drive, viewing his father's meager existence as pure vulnerability. Instead, he internalizes the uncompromising pragmatism of his mother, Phoebe, who teaches him a fundamental lesson. The world gives you nothing. You must extract it. Dropping out of school at 11, the brutal New York dockyards become his real classroom. Governed by a simple, violent hierarchy, physical strength and sheer aggression are the only currencies that matter. This harsh environment forges his fatal weakness, a pathological, all-consuming terror of appearing weak. He views empathy as a vulnerability. Power, to the young Vanderbilt, is not about earning respect. It is about forcing submission through intimidation. By the age of 16, in the year 1810, he decides to seize total control of his own fate. He demands $100 from his mother to buy a small two-masted sailing vessel called a periauger. At the time, $100 is a staggering sum for a poor farming family. Phoebe does not simply hand over the money out of maternal love. She makes a strict transactional demand. He must clear a massive rocky field on their farm, an 8-acre plot notoriously difficult to cultivate. Furthermore, he must do it in under a month. Cornelius accepts the terms. He pushes his body to the absolute physical limit, enlisting local boys to help him by promising them rides on his future boat. He clears the land, secures his funding, and buys his periauger. He names it the Swiftsure. He starts his own ferry and freight service between Staten Island and Manhattan. This early transaction is pivotal. It teaches him that every relationship, even within a blood family, is fundamentally a business deal. Emotional bonds are secondary to leverage. Operating his periauger requires grueling physical labor. A periauger is a heavy, flat-bottom boat designed for shallow waters. But when the winds die down in the harbor, it must be rowed by hand. Vanderbilt rows against the harsh currents of the New York harbor in freezing rain, blinding fog, and blistering heat. He works relentlessly, outrowing and outsailing older men. He charges 18 cents a trip. He works from dawn until midnight, sleeping in the bottom of his open boat. Up to this point, his ambition is just the rough and tumble survival of a dock worker. Everything is still, by the harsh standards of the working class, relatively normal. But the mechanisms of psychological control are already locking into place. He views other ferry operators as enemies to be eradicated. He begins to formulate a business philosophy built entirely on aggression rather than innovation. This relentless worldview, measured only in terms of absolute dominance, would soon become the weapon that destroyed his own family. The true pivot occurs in 1812. The United States declares war on Great Britain. The War of 1812 sends panic through the streets of New York. The British Navy, the most powerful maritime force on the globe, blockades the American coast. The waters around New York Harbor become highly militarized and incredibly dangerous. Most local boatmen are terrified. They pull their vessels out of the water, afraid of being captured. having their boats sunk, or being conscripted into service. Vanderbilt does the exact opposite. He looks at a national crisis and sees only leverage. While older men retreat, the 18-year-old Vanderbilt aggressively bids for a government contract to provision the military forts scattered around New York Harbor, including the heavily fortified installations at the Narrows. The military needs food, ammunition, and supplies delivered to these isolated island outposts, and they need men willing to brave the harsh weather and the looming threat of the British fleet. Vanderbilt secures the contract. He demands premium prices for his extreme risk. He sails through brutal storms and pitch-black nights, memorizing every hidden shoal, every treacherous tide, and every shallow channel in the harbor. He works himself to the bone, but he delivers. This wartime experience solidifies a dangerous psychological precedent. He realizes that chaos is profitable. While others are paralyzed by fear, he can step in, assert total control, and extract maximum wealth. He begins to view crisis not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to exploit the weakness of others. During these years, he earns the nickname Commodore. Originally, it is a term used mockingly by his older competitors to describe his brash, commanding, and arrogant attitude on the docks. But Vanderbilt does not reject the mockery. He weaponizes it. He adopts the title, forcing the men who meant it as an insult to use it as a title of genuine submission. It is a brilliant psychological maneuver. He takes the very weapon meant to humiliate him and turns it into a crown. By the time he reaches his early 20s, the genesis of the predator is complete. He has amassed a small fleet of boats. He has thousands of dollars hidden away. He has successfully distanced himself from the pathetic financial failure of his father. But the damage to his soul is already done. He has built a fortress around his mind, a fortress where no vulnerability is permitted to enter. Every person he meets is quickly categorized into one of two boxes: an obstacle to be crushed or a tool to be used. This worldview works perfectly on the violent docks of early 19th century New York. It builds an empire, but a family is not an empire. A family requires the very things Vanderbilt has meticulously purged from his psychology: patience, vulnerability, and unconditional love. He is about to take a wife. He is about to bring a woman into his heavily defended psychological fortress. And the consequences of merging his predatory instincts with the intimate bonds of marriage will create a domestic tragedy that the history books are still trying to cover up. By 1817, the era of the sail was dying, and the age of steam is roaring to life. Up until this moment, Vanderbilt has relied on his own sheer physical endurance to row and sail his periaugers across the New York harbor. But he is a man constantly scanning the horizon for the next mechanism of leverage. He looks at the new massive steamboats belching black smoke across the water, and he understands instantly that the rules of the game have changed. Wind and muscle are obsolete. Steam is power. Steam is the future. But there is a massive obstacle standing in his way. The waters of New York do not belong to the public. They belong to a legal monopoly. The powerful patrician Robert R. Livingston and the famed inventor Robert Fulton have convinced the New York State Legislature to grant them the exclusive sole right to operate steamboats in New York waters. Anyone else who dares to launch a steamboat will have their vessels seized by the state. To the average working-class boatman, this monopoly is an unassailable fortress. It represents the old-world aristocratic power, backed by the full force of the law. But to Cornelius Vanderbilt, a monopoly owned by someone else is not just a business hurdle. It is a personal insult. It triggers his profound terror of being subjugated. He cannot allow another man to dictate where he can and cannot sail. The public will soon view Vanderbilt as a working-class hero, a rogue cham, pawn of free enterprise fighting against corrupt aristocrats. But his ultimate goal is never to free the market. His goal is to clear the board so he can become the new absolute dictator of the waters. Free trade means nothing to him. The rights of common boatmen are irrelevant. He despises the Livingston-Fulton monopoly strictly because someone else controls it. To fight this monopoly, Vanderbilt makes a highly calculated strategic retreat. He temporarily sets aside his fierce independence and sells his beloved sailing vessels. He takes a job as a steamboat captain for a wealthy, stubborn New Jersey planter named Thomas Gibbons. Gibbons has his own steamboat, and he is determined to run it between New Jersey and New York in direct defiance of the Livingston-Fulton monopoly. Gibbons has the capital and the legal team. Vanderbilt has the aggression, the maritime skill, and the complete lack of respect for authority required to execute the war. Vanderbilt stands at the helm of Gibbons's steamboat, the Bellona. He is covered in soot, breathing in the noxious fumes of burning pine wood. The engine pistons pound like a mechanical heartbeat beneath the deck. He is actively hunting for conflict. For 60 consecutive days, Vanderbilt deliberately sails the Bellona into New York waters, daring the authorities to arrest him. The Livingston-Fulton faction hires process servers and law enforcement officials to hunt him down. Vanderbilt treats it like a blood sport. He develops an elaborate theatrical system of evasion. When the police board the vessel, Vanderbilt vanishes. He has a secret, hidden compartment built into the walls of the ship's cabin, where he silently waits out the search while the authorities scour the deck in frustration. On other days, he hires a decoy, a woman dressed in his heavy captain's coat, to stand at the wheel while he slips away into the crowded docks. The issue isn't just that he breaks the law. The issue is that he actively mocks it. He demonstrates to everyone watching that the law is not a moral absolute. It is merely a suggestion for those too weak to bypass it. This high-stakes game of cat and mouse culminates in one of the most important legal battles in American history. Thomas Gibbons takes the fight all the way to the United States Supreme Court. In 1824, in the landmark case Gibbons versus Ogden, the Supreme Court rules that New York's steamboat monopoly is unconstitutional. The federal government, not the states, has the power to regulate interstate commerce. The monopoly is shattered. The waters are suddenly open to everyone. Fares plummet, and the public rejoices. Vanderbilt is hailed as a conquering hero of the people. Following Thomas Gibbons's death in 1829, Vanderbilt has saved a massive sum of money, roughly $30,000, and decides it is time to build his own empire. The waters are now free, but Vanderbilt has absolutely no intention of sharing them. He looks at the Hudson River, the most lucrative trade route in the country, stretching from New York City to Albany. It is controlled by the Hudson River Steamboat Association, a powerful cartel of wealthy gentlemen who have agreed to keep ticket prices artificially high at $3 a passenger. Vanderbilt builds a lightning-fast steamboat named the Citizen. He brings it to the Hudson, and he introduces a tactic that will forever alter the landscape of American capitalism. He launches the $0 war. Instead of offering slightly better service or minor discounts, he slashed his fare from $3 directly to $1. The association panics and lowers their prices to match him. Vanderbilt smiles and drops his fare to 10 cents. The association, bleeding cash and desperate to survive, matches him again. Then Vanderbilt does the unthinkable. He drops the ticket price to $0. He allows passengers to travel the 150 miles up the Hudson River for free. How does he survive this? Vanderbilt charges nothing for the ticket, but he maintains an absolute monopoly on the food and drink sold on board the ship. Once the passengers are on the water, trapped on the vessel for hours, they get hungry and thirsty. Vanderbilt jacks up the prices at the ship's bar and the dining room to extortionate levels. He feeds them heavily salted meats, ensuring they will be desperate to buy his wildly overpriced beer and water. He turns a massive profit while his competitors hemorrhage money. This is the very essence of how he exercises power. He weaponizes his own willingness to suffer short-term losses in order to inflict fatal, unrecoverable damage on his enemies. He chokes the Hudson River Steamboat Association until they can barely breathe. They finally wave the white flag. But Vanderbilt does not buy them out. He executes a maneuver of pure, unadulterated extortion. The association begs him to leave the river. Vanderbilt agrees, but on one condition. They must pay him a massive lump sum of $100,000, plus an annual stipend of $5,000 every single year just to stay away. He was not being paid to provide a service. He was being paid a fortune simply to not destroy them. It is corporate blackmail, perfectly legal and devastatingly effective. He repeats this exact same tactic on Long Island Sound, on the route to Boston, and on the route to Philadelphia. He launches steamboats, drops the fares to $0, crushes the local operators, and then forces them to pay him a massive annual ransom to take his boats elsewhere. By his mid-30s, Cornelius Vanderbilt is no longer just a boatman. He is a millionaire in the making. He has forged a philosophy of total war. He has proven that empathy in business is a lethal liability, and that the only way to ensure absolute security is to completely obliterate anyone who stands in your path. He believes with every fiber of his being that his ruthless methodology is flawless. He believes that dominance can solve any problem. Up to this point, cruelty has been strictly financial. The victims of his $0 wars are wealthy businessmen who can afford to take a loss. The damage is contained to ledgers, bank accounts, and bruised egos. Everything is still, by the harsh logic of Wall Street, just business. The ruthless strategies that built an empire on the water would prove disastrous when dragged across the threshold of his own home. He has mastered the art of destroying men. Now, he will turn his ruthless demand for total submission toward a much softer, far more vulnerable target, his own wife. In 1813, a 19-year-old Cornelius Vanderbilt decided it was time to take a wife. Seeking neither romance nor an intellectual equal, he specifically chose a subordinate. He finds exactly what he needs in his first cousin, Sophia Johnson. Marrying young or marrying a cousin was relatively common at the time, but his choice of a bride was entirely driven by cold, calculated mechanics. Vanderbilt evaluates Sophia the exact same way he evaluates a new boat. He looks for durability, utility, and cost-effectiveness. Sophia is quiet, deeply submissive, and remarkably hardworking. She understands the grueling demands of a working-class life. Most importantly, she poses absolutely no threat to his authority. Behind closed doors, the ledger of his marriage was entirely one-sided. His fatal weakness, his absolute terror of appearing soft or dependent, dictates every interaction he has with his bride. He cannot afford to show her genuine affection because in his warped psychology, Affection is an admission that he needs her. If he needs her, she has leverage. And Cornelius Vanderbilt does not allow anyone on earth to hold leverage over him. The physical reality of their early marriage is completely devoid of the glamour the Vanderbilt name will later represent. They live in a cramped, drafty boarding house. Vanderbilt is constantly on the water, barking orders at his crews, chewing tobacco, and building his fortune. When he comes home, he does not leave the dictator at the docks. He brings the Commodore through the front door. He demands his meals on time, his clothes scrubbed, and total silence when he calculates his finances. And then the children begin to arrive. Sophia will endure an astonishing 13 pregnancies. 13 times she pushes her body to the brink of death in an era of primitive medicine. While Vanderbilt is out waging his ruthless $0 wars against the steamboat monopolies, who is actually providing the steady, reliable financial safety net for the family? It is Sophia. In 1818, when Vanderbilt takes the job running steamboats for Thomas Gibbons, the family relocates to New Brunswick, New Jersey. Gibbons owns a large, bustling halfway house called the Bologna Hotel. It serves as a crucial rest stop for passengers traveling between New York and Philadelphia. Vanderbilt manages the ships, but he forces Sophia to manage the hotel. Sophia is heavily pregnant year after year. Yet, she is up at 4 a.m. She manages a staff of rowdy servants. She oversees the kitchens, preparing massive meals for hundreds of hungry, demanding travelers. She scrubs the floors. She changes the linens. She manages the hotel's ledgers, ensuring every penny is accounted for. The hotel is a massive financial success, and it becomes highly profitable entirely because of her relentless, unpaid labor. The public sees a bustling, successful family business. Passengers see a clean hotel and a gruff but effective steamboat captain. But the inner reality is a domestic sweatshop. Vanderbilt treats his wife not as a partner, but as his most exploited employee. Does he thank her? Does he share the wealth? Absolutely not. To acknowledge her contribution would be to admit that his success is not entirely self-made. So instead of gratitude, he offers contempt. He routinely criticizes her management. He pockets all the profits from the Bologna Hotel, using her hard-earned cash to fund his own side investments while keeping her on a strict, meager household allowance. He forces her to beg for the very money she generated. This is exactly how he exercises power. He systematically strips away her financial independence, isolating her completely, ensuring she has absolutely no means of survival outside of his direct control. As the wealth grows, so does the family. Sophia gives birth to 9 daughters and 4 boys. To Vanderbilt, the daughters are largely irrelevant. He views them merely as future assets, bargaining chips to be married off to secure business alliances or political favors. But he scrutinizes his sons with a terrifying predatory intensity. He is looking for a mirror. He wants heirs who are as ruthless, physically imposing, and devoid of empathy as he is. What he gets instead is a profound disappointment. His oldest son, William Henry, is born with a heavy, unathletic build. He is quiet, cautious, and completely lacks his father's killer instinct. Vanderbilt despises him for it. He openly calls William Henry a blockhead in front of guests. He constantly belittles the boy, mocking his lack of aggression. When William Henry reaches adulthood, Vanderbilt actually banishes him to a barren farm in Staten Island, convinced the boy is too incompetent to survive on Wall Street. He tells his associates that William Henry will never amount to anything. But the true tragedy lies with his second son, Cornelius Jeremiah, known as Cornel. Cornel is charming, articulate, and desperately craves his father's approval, but Cornel suffers from epileptic seizures. In the early 19th century, medical understanding of epilepsy is primitive, but Vanderbilt's reaction is not born of medical ignorance. It is born of his fatal flaw. He looks at his son thrashing on the floor during a seizure, and he does not feel a father's protective instinct. He feels profound disgust. He views the illness as a moral failing, a physical brand of weakness that taints the Vanderbilt name. He cannot control the seizures, and because he cannot control them, he hates the boy who has them. His ruthless demand for flawlessness, the very trait that forged his empire, would soon become the catalyst for his own domestic ruin. Up to this point, through the 1820s and into the 1830s, everything is still, on the surface, okay. Sophia is exhausted, but she believes she is fulfilling her duty as a wife. She endures the emotional neglect and the physical labor because she believes that eventually she will earn her rest. By the late 1830s, Vanderbilt's wealth has exploded. He is a millionaire multiple times over. The era of the Bologna Hotel is behind them. He moves the family back to Staten Island, purchasing a massive plot of land and building a sprawling, opulent mansion. Sophia is relieved. She is deeply attached to the quiet, rural landscape of Staten Island. It is where she was born, where she raised her children, and where she feels safe. She believes the grand mansion is her final reward. She has spent decades scrubbing floors and managing ledgers so her husband could build his empire. Now in her late 40s, with her health deteriorating from 13 pregnancies, she finally has a comfortable home. She wants nothing more than to live out her remaining years in peace, surrounded by the familiar faces of her local community. She believes she has finally satisfied the Commodore, but she fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the man she married. Vanderbilt's appetite for dominance is a bottomless pit. A mansion on Staten Island is no longer enough. The center of American power is shifting to the glittering, ruthless streets of Manhattan, specifically Washington Square. The old money aristocrats live there. The politicians live there. Vanderbilt decides he must conquer it. He informs Sophia that they are leaving Staten Island. He is going to build an even grander 4-story townhome in the heart of Manhattan. Sophia, for the first time in her 30 years of marriage, says no. She is tired. She does not want to enter the high society world of Manhattan, a world of lavish parties and vicious social politics, where she will be mocked for her simple manners and lack of formal education. She refuses to pack her bags. She stands her ground in the Staten Island mansion and tells her husband she will not go. It is a minor domestic dispute. Most husbands would argue, negotiate, or perhaps simply leave her in the country house while keeping a residence in the city, but Cornelius Vanderbilt does not negotiate. To him, Sophia's refusal is not a sign of exhaustion. It is a rebellion. It is a direct, intolerable challenge to his absolute authority. His fatal weakness flares up violently. If he allows his wife to tell him no, he appears weak. If she defies him, the entire psychological fortress he has built around his life begins to crumble. He looks at the woman who gave him 13 children, the woman who worked her fingers to the bone managing his hotel, and he decides she must be broken. He will not just force her to move. He will make an example of her. He will remind his children, his servants, and the entire city of New York what happens when you dare to cross the Commodore. By 1846, the sprawling Staten Island mansion had ceased to be a home. It has become a heavily fortified psychological battleground. Vanderbilt is ready to deploy his immense wealth, not to build a railroad, but to orchestrate one of the most chilling, legally sanctioned kidnappings in New York history. Sophia Vanderbilt, exhausted from 3 decades of relentless physical labor and 13 pregnancies, has drawn her final line in the sand. She refuses to pack her belongings and move to the glittering, vicious social arena of Washington Square in Manhattan. To the outside world, it appears to be a mere domestic disagreement over real estate. But the reality is far darker. There is a specific, highly concealed catalyst behind Sophia's sudden rebellion. Vanderbilt's demand to move is not just about conquering high society, it is about consolidating his vices. Recently, he had brought a young, attractive female governess into the Staten Island home, ostensibly to tutor his younger daughters. In truth, he brazenly initiated a sexual affair with the girl directly under his wife's roof. For 30 years, Sophia had tolerated his rough language, his financial tight-fistedness, and his emotional neglect. But this public humiliation inside her own sanctuary is the breaking point. She does not just refuse to move, she demands the governess be fired. He cannot fire the governess. To dismiss the girl would mean taking an order from his wife, a direct threat to his absolute authority. It would mean acknowledging that someone else holds leverage over his behavior. In his warped psychology, yielding to his wife's moral boundary is the equivalent of waving a white flag in a steamboat war. He must crush the rebellion entirely. While infidelity was common among wealthy men of the 19th century, his weaponization of the medical establishment to criminalize his wife's rational reaction was unprecedented. Vanderbilt looks at Sophia's anger, her weeping, and her desperate pleas for basic respect, and he does not see a grieving wife. He sees an opportunity for a tactical strike. He begins a meticulous, terrifying campaign of gaslighting. He pulls his older children and his domestic servants aside and speaks to them in grave, hushed tones. He tells them that their mother's mind is failing. He points to her emotional outbursts over the governess and labels them hysteria. He insists that the physical toll of her many pregnancies has finally shattered her sanity. The legal reality of 1846 magnified this terror. Under the doctrine of coverture, a married woman in the United States possesses almost no independent legal identity. She does not own property. She does not hold separate legal rights. She is, for all legal intents and purposes, entirely subsumed by the identity of her husband. Under the law, he owns the steamboats in the harbor, and he owns her. He uses this absolute legal authority to orchestrate a domestic coup. He reaches out to the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum, located in what is now Morningside Heights in Manhattan. Bloomingdale is not a ragged, overcrowded public poorhouse. It is a premium, private institution designed specifically for the wealthy elites of New York. And because it is a private business, it operates on a simple principle: cash dictates diagnosis. It serves as a highly discreet, perfectly legal dumping ground for embarrassing family members. Husbands use it to silence rebellious wives. Wealthy families use it to hide disabled children. Vanderbilt uses his immense wealth and overwhelming intimidation to bypass any rigorous psychiatric evaluation. He simply pays the exorbitant admission fees and secures the commitment papers from a sympathetic, easily bribed physician. The extraction is swift, brutal, and entirely devoid of empathy. A carriage arrives at the Staten Island mansion. Strong men enter the home. Sophia is physically seized. A sane, deeply devoted mother is forcibly dragged from her own parlor while her children watch in paralyzed silence. She begs for help. She screams that she is not mad. Vanderbilt stands by, a heavy, imposing figure, his jaw working a wad of tobacco. He watches the mother of his 13 children being hauled away to a psychiatric prison, and his face remains completely impassive. He does not flinch. He has successfully reasserted total dominance. He has proven to his children, his servants, and most importantly to himself, that his authority is absolute and inescapable. The contradiction between his public image and the private reality is grotesque. When word inevitably leaks to the New York press and the elite social circles that the Commodore's wife has been institutionalized, the public reaction is one of profound sympathy for Vanderbilt. The narrative he spins is masterfully manipulative. He plays the role of the stoic, burdened patriarch, a great man of industry who is tragically cursed with a mad wife. His business associates pity him. Meanwhile, inside the newly purchased Manhattan mansion, the reality is entirely different. With Sophia safely locked behind iron gates, Vanderbilt's domestic life devolves into a theater of open decadence. He brings his mistresses, including the governess, freely into the home. He hosts raucous card games. He turns the family residence into a monument to his own unchecked impulses, completely unbothered by the fact that his wife is currently trapped in a nightmare. And the reality of the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum in the 1840s is indeed a nightmare. Even in a facility reserved for the wealthy, the psychiatric treatments of the era are closer to medieval torture than modern medicine. Treatment for female hysteria involves forced isolation, bloodletting, blistering the skin to draw out bad humors, and being plunged into freezing water to shock the nervous system. But the most insidious torture Sophia endures is psychological. She is a completely sane woman locked in a ward filled with the genuinely afflicted. She is forced to listen to the screams of patients suffering from severe schizophrenia, advanced syphilis, and manic episodes. She is stripped of her identity, reduced to a medical inmate. Every time she begs the orderlies to release her, every time she insists that her husband is simply trying to hide his affair, the medical staff notes her desperation in their ledgers as paranoia and delusions of persecution. Her very attempts to speak the truth are weaponized as proof of her insanity. She remains in this terrifying limbo for several months. Vanderbilt refuses to visit her. He cuts off her communication with her children. He leaves her to rot, waiting for the psychological pressure to completely break her will. But a complication arises. The chief E.T. physician at Bloomingdale, Dr. Pliny Earle, is one of the few men in the psychiatric field attempting to introduce genuine empirical medical observation into asylum care. Over the course of months, Dr. Earle carefully observes Sophia. He conducts extensive interviews with her, and he slowly realizes the horrifying truth. Sophia Vanderbilt is not suffering from dementia. She is not experiencing mania. She shows absolutely no symptoms of psychosis. She is simply a woman suffering from acute grief, exhaustion, and the profound trauma of being betrayed by a ruthless husband. Dr. Earle finds himself in a highly dangerous position. He is holding the sane wife of the most powerful and vindictive millionaire in New York. If he keeps her, he violates his medical oath and risks a potential scandal. If he releases her against Vanderbilt's wishes, he risks the wrath of a man known for systematically destroying his enemies. Ultimately, the medical reality cannot be ignored. Dr. Earle formally concludes that there is no psychiatric justification for keeping her confined. He contacts Vanderbilt and informs him that the asylum will no longer hold his wife. Vanderbilt is furious, but he is also intensely calculating. He knows that if he fights the doctors and a formal legal inquiry is launched, his affairs and his bribery will be dragged into the public spotlight. He values his public leverage too much to risk a genuine scandal. So, he relents. He allows her to be discharged, but the Sophia Vanderbilt who emerges from the heavy iron gates of Bloomingdale is not the same woman who was dragged in. The Commodore's strategy has worked flawlessly. He did not need to keep her locked up forever. He only needed to keep her there long enough to teach her a permanent, terrifying lesson. Sophia has learned that her husband possesses the power, the money, and the absolute lack of moral hesitation required to erase her from society at will. If she ever defies him again, he can simply buy a new diagnose, and send her back to the screaming wards. She is completely broken. She quietly packs her bags, leaves her beloved Staten Island, and moves into the Washington Square mansion. She never raises her voice to him again. She turns a blind eye to his mistresses. She sinks into a quiet, heavily medicated depression, living out her remaining years as a silent ghost haunting the halls of his grand Manhattan palace. Vanderbilt has won the $0 war of his own marriage. He has forced a total, unconditional surrender. His success with Sophia fundamentally rewires his approach to domestic control. Up to this point, his cruelty was a reactionary measure to crush a rebellion. Now, it becomes a calculated strategy. He realizes that the insane asylum is an incredibly efficient, highly discreet tool for family management. He looks around his new Manhattan mansion, and his eyes land on his second son, Cornelius Jeremiah. Cornel, the boy whose epileptic seizures disgust the Commodore, the boy whose physical weakness triggers Vanderbilt's deepest, most violent insecurities. Vanderbilt has tasted the ultimate power of medical incarceration. And as he watches his son thrash helplessly on the floor, the Commodore realizes he does not need to tolerate this embarrassment anymore. He already knows exactly who to pay and exactly where to send him. In 1849, a tense silence settled over the Washington Square mansion. Sophia Vanderbilt, fresh from her terrifying incarceration at the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum, moves through the grand halls like a silent, broken ghost. The Commodore has successfully weaponized the medical establishment to crush his wife's rebellion. He has proven that the walls of his home are just as fortified and just as unforgiving as his steamboat empire. Now, his eyes turn to a different perceived threat within his own bloodline. His second son, Cornelius Jeremiah Vanderbilt, known as Cornel. His true personality was revealed in how he categorized human beings. Vanderbilt does not see children, he sees heirs. He evaluates his offspring exactly the way he evaluates a fleet of ships. He looks for structural integrity, reliability, and the capacity to generate power. His eldest son, William Henry, is dull, unimaginative, and lacks any semblance of a killer instinct. Vanderbilt despises William's passivity, frequently exiling him to a farm on Staten Island because he believes the boy is too soft for Wall Street. But William Henry has one redeeming quality. He obeys. He submits entirely to his father's will. Cornel is different. Cornel is sharp, charismatic, and highly intelligent. He possesses the very spark of ambition that William Henry lacks. Under normal circumstances, Cornel should have been the favored son, the natural successor to the Vanderbilt empire, but Cornel has a fatal, unforgivable flaw in the eyes of his father. He suffers from epilepsy. In the mid-19th century, medical science has no real understanding of neurological disorders. Epilepsy is shrouded in superstition and stigma, often viewed as a form of madness or a physical manifestation of moral decay. But Cornelius Vanderbilt is not a man driven by religious superstition. His reaction to his son's illness is completely devoid of paternal empathy. The physical contrast is stark. The Commodore is a towering, robust man who has spent his entire life forcing the physical world, ocean currents, massive steam engines, rival businessmen, to submit to his absolute control. Yet he must look down at his own son, thrashing on the floor in the grip of a grand mal seizure. A seizure is the ultimate loss of physical control. It is the body rebelling against the mind. To Vanderbilt, watching his son seize is not a tragedy that evokes paternal empathy. It is a profound insult. It is a glaring public display of weakness carrying the Vanderbilt name. He looks at his son and does not see a sick boy who needs a doctor. He sees a defective engine piston. And in the Commodore's world, when a piece of machinery is broken, you do not coddle it. You discard it. The gap between what a father should be and what Vanderbilt actually is becomes grotesque. Instead of providing medical care or comfort, he treats Cornel with open verbal disgust. He mocks him. He calls him a weakling. He makes it entirely clear that Cornel is a genetic failure, a stain on the dynasty. But Cornel does not possess his mother's quiet endurance. He is a Vanderbilt. He possesses his father's aggressive streak, but he lacks his father's discipline. Cut off from his father's affection and barred from participating in the family business, Cornel decides to strike back. He launches a rebellion, and he specifically targets the one thing the Commodore loves more than anything else: his money and his public credit. Cornel develops a severe gambling addiction. He frequents the brothels, the card rooms, and the underground gambling dens of New York. But he does not gamble with his own money because his father keeps him on a starvation allowance. Instead, Cornel sits down at the poker tables and issues IOU markers. He signs them with a flourish, C. Vanderbilt. He actively cashes fraudulent checks across the city, using the immense weight of the Vanderbilt name to secure thousands of dollars in unsecured debt. This is not merely the reckless behavior of an addicted youth. It is a highly calculated psychological strike against a tyrant. Cornel knows that his father's entire empire is built on absolute financial credibility. By flooding the New York underworld with bad debt bearing the Vanderbilt name, Cornel is holding his father's reputation hostage. It is a desperate, destructive cry for attention. He is forcing the Commodore to acknowledge him, even if that acknowledgement comes in the form of rage. Cornel's crimes paled in comparison to Vanderbilt's terrifying retaliation. A normal father might pay the debts, send the boy to a sanatorium, or attempt to intervene with the gambling AE addiction. But Vanderbilt only knows one method of conflict resolution: total, overwhelming annihilation. He will not be extorted by rival steamboat captains, and he certainly will not be extorted by his own defective son. In 1849, the Commodore refuses to pay a single penny of Cornel's gambling debts. He allows his own son to be hunted by creditors and the police, and then he deploys the exact same horrific tactic he used on Sophia just 3 years earlier. He has Cornel arrested. He does not take him to a regular prison. He uses his immense wealth and political leverage to bypass standard legal due process. He drags his 18-year-old son to the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum. The historical admission ledger for the Bloomingdale Asylum still exists. Next to the name Cornelius Jeremiah Vanderbilt, the attending physician wrote the official medical diagnosis justifying the incarceration. It does not say epilepsy. It does not say gambling addiction. The ledger reads in chillingly plain ink, dementia supported by father. The prosecution rests on this single line, supported by father. Vanderbilt essentially paid the medical establishment to declare a bright, articulate 18-year-old boy permanently insane. He bought a diagnosis to physically erase his son from society. The psychological torture Cornel endures inside the asylum is profound. He is locked in wards with patients suffering from severe, untreatable psychoses. He is subjected to the barbaric psychiatric practices of the 1840s. He is stripped of his dignity, his freedom, and his very identity. He is reminded every single day that his father possesses the power to bury him alive, legally, without leaving a trace. He remains trapped in Bloomingdale for months. When he is finally discharged, the dynamic of his life is permanently shattered. He is officially in exile. To rid himself of the boy completely, Vanderbilt actually funds Cornel's passage to California. The year is 1849, and the gold rush has just begun. Vanderbilt hopes his defective son will either strike it rich and pay back his debts or die quietly in the lawless camps of the West, far away from the New York society pages. Cornel fails, returning to New York sicker, poorer, and more addicted than ever. By 1854, Cornel resumes his rebellion, forging more checks to feed his gambling habits. Vanderbilt does not hesitate. He strikes with the exact same hammer. He has Cornel arrested for forgery and immediately recommitted to the Bloomingdale asylum. But this time, the medical staff pushes back. The chief physician examines Cornel thoroughly. He observes the young man's articulate speech, his clear memory, and his undeniable grip on reality. The doctor realizes that he is simply holding a desperate, financially ruined young man whose only true affliction is his surname. The physician signs the discharge papers, releasing Cornel back onto the streets. As he hands over the documents, the doctor reportedly looks at the Commodore's son and delivers a line of devastating, undeniable truth. You are no more crazy than I am. The doctor knows it, Cornel knows it, and Vanderbilt knows it. But the truth does not matter. The strategy has worked. Cornel's spirit is entirely broken. From 1854 onward, he will never mount a meaningful rebellion against his father again. He is reduced to a pathetic, shivering beggar, reliant on a meager, strictly controlled allowance doled out by the Commodore. If Cornel disobeys, the allowance is cut, and he starves. Vanderbilt has successfully crushed the second uprising in his household. He has secured total, unchallenged dictatorship over his bloodline. In the span of a few short years, he systematically dismantles the psychological foundations of his wife and son, using the exact same mechanisms of bribery, legal manipulation, and absolute lack of empathy that he uses to destroy rival ferry companies. He has proven that he will burn his own family to the ground to maintain his leverage. Having perfected the art of total subjugation at home, his appetite for dominance expanded. The year is 1849. While he is busy locking his son in a psychiatric ward, the United States is completely consumed by a singular, frantic obsession, the California gold rush. Hundreds of thousands of desperate, ambitious Americans are trying to reach the West Coast, driven by the promise of instant wealth. But the geography of the continent is a massive, deadly obstacle. To get from New York to San Francisco, a traveler has two terrible options. They can take a grueling 6-month overland journey across the plains in a wagon, risking starvation, cholera, and exposure. Or they can board a ship and sail all the way around the treacherous southern tip of South America, a harrowing voyage of 15,000 miles that often ends in shipwreck or scurvy. There is a desperate, highly lucrative demand for a faster, safer shortcut. Cornelius Vanderbilt stands in his New York office, looking at a massive map of the Western Hemisphere. While other businessmen look at the narrow isthmus of Panama, his finger traces a line slightly north, landing on a narrow, volatile strip of jungle in Central America, Nicaragua. He realizes that whoever controls the transit route across that specific piece of land will hold the key to the greatest wealth transfer in American history. He is about to take the exact same ruthless zero-sum tactics he used to crush his family and unleash them on an international scale. He is not just going to build a transit company. He is about to buy a foreign government, instigate an international crisis, and show the world what happens when the Commodore goes to war. He studies the map with the cold, calculating eye of a predator assessing a new hunting ground. Nicaragua boasts the San Juan River, which flows from the Atlantic Ocean into the massive Lake Nicaragua. From the western edge of that lake, it is only a 12-mile strip of land to the Pacific Ocean. Vanderbilt. LT calculates that a transit route through Nicaragua will cut a staggering 500 miles off the Panama journey. He secures a charter from the fragile Nicaraguan government to build a canal, but a canal will take years and millions of dollars to dig. Vanderbilt does not have the patience for years. He wants the cash flow immediately. He establishes the Accessory Transit Company. The plan is simple but logistically terrifying. He will use steamboats to carry passengers up the river and across the lake, and then use a fleet of stagecoaches to rush them across the 12-mile strip of jungle to waiting ships on the Pacific. But the British engineers and maritime experts look at the San Juan River and declare the plan impossible. The river is choked with fallen mahogany trees, shifting sandbars, and violent churning rapids. They tell Vanderbilt that no steamboat on Earth can navigate those rapids. When told the river is impossible to navigate, Vanderbilt does not consult a new team of engineers. He handles it himself. He boards a small steamboat named the Director. He strips off his heavy coat, stands at the wheel in the suffocating tropical heat, and commands the crew to steam directly toward the Machuca Rapids. The water is boiling over massive boulders. The current is vicious. The engine strains and the boat begins to slide backward. The crew panics. Vanderbilt does something that defies all safety regulations and common sense. He orders the engineer to physically tie down the safety valve of the steam boiler. This is an act of sheer madness. Tying down the valve prevents the steam from escaping, pushing the pressure far beyond the engine's design limits. It turns the boiler into a ticking bomb that could explode at any second, instantly killing everyone on board. But his absolute refusal to be defeated by any obstacle, man or nature, overrides his instinct for self-preservation. He risks his own life and the lives of his crew simply to prove he cannot be stopped. And the engine screams. The paddle wheels violently thrash the water, and slowly, agonizing, the Director inches up and over the rapids. He has conquered the river. The Accessory Transit Company is born, and it is a financial juggernaut. It transports up to 2,000 passengers a month. It prints money, generating over $1 million a year in pure profit for the Commodore. He has essentially monopolized the artery of the American gold rush. Up to this point, his exercise of power has been confined to business, But the staggering wealth of the accessory transit company introduces a new, highly dangerous dynamic. Vanderbilt begins to act not just as a CEO, but as a sovereign state. He dictates terms to the Nicaraguan government. He treats the local population with absolute contempt. The contradiction is glaring. In New York, he is hailed as a titan of modern transport. In Central America, he operates as an unregulated imperial warlord. Then, in 1853, he makes a rare critical error. He decides to take a vacation. For the first time in his life, at nearly 60 years old, Vanderbilt steps away from his ledgers. He builds the North Star, the largest, most luxurious private steam yacht the world has ever seen. It is a floating palace outfitted with velvet upholstery, marble fixtures, and a grand dining room. He takes his family, including the deeply medicated and subdued Sophia, on a grand tour of Europe. He wants to show the old world aristocrats the sheer magnitude of American industrial wealth. Before he leaves, he hands the daily management of the accessory transit company to two trusted business partners, Charles Morgan and Cornelius Garrison. This is the psychological turning point. Vanderbilt, for one brief moment, showed a microscopic sliver of trust. He delegated authority. He allowed himself to step away from the absolute center of control. And the moment his yacht disappears over the horizon, Morgan and Garrison betray him. They look at the massive profits of the transit route and decide they do not want to share. While Vanderbilt is shaking hands with European royalty, Morgan and Garrison begin systematically manipulating the company's stock on Wall Street. They siphon off profits. They plot to entirely wrest control of the Nicaraguan route away from the Commodore. When Vanderbilt returns to New York and discovers the betrayal, the psychological fallout is catastrophic. His partners have not just stolen his money. They have triggered his deepest, most primal fear. They have made him look foolish. They have exposed a vulnerability. His reaction is swift and legendary. He bypassed the courts and his lawyers entirely. To rely on the legal system would be an admission that he requires the state to fight his battles. It would be an admission of weakness. Instead, he picks up a pen and writes a brief, terrifying letter to his former partners. It reads, "Gentlemen, you have undertaken to cheat me. I won't sue you, for the law is too slow. I will ruin you. Yours truly, Cornelius Vanderbilt." This is not a threat. It is a guarantee. Knowing Vanderbilt was coming for them, Morgan and Garrison realize they cannot beat him in a standard financial war. So they escalate the conflict to a staggering geopolitical level. They forge an alliance with a man named William Walker. William Walker is a filibuster, a private American mercenary who believes in manifest destiny and the expansion of slavery. In 1855, with a small army of heavily armed mercenaries, Walker invades Nicaragua. Incredibly, he successfully overthrows the government and installs himself as the dictator of the country. The United States government, under President Franklin Pierce, actually formally recognizes Walker's illegitimate, violently installed regime. Morgan and Garrison strike a deal with the new mercenary dictator. In exchange for financial backing and weapons smuggled on their steamboats, Walker uses his new absolute power to formally revoke Cornelius Vanderbilt's charge. Terror for the accessory transit company. He seizes all of Vanderbilt's steamboats, docks, and infrastructure and hands them directly to Morgan and Garrison. They have stolen his company using a private army. Faced with a hostile foreign dictator backed by the U.S. president, a normal businessman would accept defeat. Vanderbilt's retaliation defied all rational business logic. Cornelius Vanderbilt decides to go to war against a sovereign nation. He sets up a war room in his New York office. He bypasses the United States government entirely. He reaches out directly to the neighboring Central American nations, Costa Rica, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. These nations are terrified that William Walker will expand his mercenary empire into their territories. Vanderbilt leverages that terror. He offers to fund their militaries. He provides massive financial backing, logistical support, and strategic intelligence to a coalition army of Central American troops. He essentially hires multiple foreign governments to act as his own personal enforcement squad. But Vanderbilt knows that ground troops alone cannot defeat Walker. Walker's survival depends entirely on the constant stream of new American recruits and ammunition flowing down from New York on Morgan and Garrison's stolen steamboats. To win the war, Vanderbilt must sever the artery. He sends one of his most ruthless and capable agents, a man named Sylvanus Spencer, secretly into the Nicaraguan jungle. Spencer's mission is not diplomatic. It is a highly coordinated, violent commando raid. Backed by Costa Rican troops, Spencer systematically ambushes and captures every single steamboat on the San Juan River. They seize the docks. They take control of the forts. In a matter of days, Vanderbilt's agent completely cuts off William Walker's supply line. He traps the mercenary dictator in the jungle without food, without ammunition, and without reinforcements. The consequences are horrific. Deprived of supplies, Walker's army is day-key, mated by cholera, starvation, and the advancing coalition forces. Thousands of men die in the sweltering heat. The thriving transit route is reduced to burning ruins. The Nicaraguan economy is shattered. Ultimately, William Walker is defeated, forced to surrender to the U.S. Navy to avoid being slaughtered by the coalition. He is later executed by a firing squad in Honduras. Morgan and Garrison are financially crushed, their stolen steamboat empire collapsing into bankruptcy exactly as Vanderbilt promised. Vanderbilt wins. He ruins them. The true cost of this victory is staggering. He financed a bloody, devastating war in a foreign country simply to settle a personal vendetta against two men who bruised his ego. He treated the lives of thousands of Nicaraguans, Costa Ricans, and American mercenaries as entirely disposable pawns on a chessboard. He proved that his wealth gave him the power to bypass international law, manipulate sovereign governments, and dictate the fate of a nation. He successfully defended his psychological fortress. No one would ever dare to cheat the Commodore again. But the accessory transit company is effectively destroyed in the crossfire. The route is too unstable, the infrastructure too damaged. Vanderbilt looks at the wreckage he has caused, shrugs, and walks away. He realizes that the era of the steamboat is reaching its natural conclusion. He is in his late 60s. Most men are preparing for death. Cornelius Vanderbilt is preparing for his greatest conquest yet. Now his willingness to bend governments to his will and treat human lives as acceptable collateral damage was about to be unleashed directly onto the soil of the United States. He turns his eyes away from the water and looks toward the iron rails stretching across the continent. The Commodore is about to become the master of the railroad. By 1860, the United States stood on the precipice of a civil war, threatening to shatter the nation's economy. At this precise moment of national crisis, Cornelius Vanderbilt is approaching his 70th birthday. Most men of his immense wealth and advanced age are retreating to their estates, preparing their wills, and quietly fading into history. But Vanderbilt is not like other men. His pathological need for dominance does not age. It mutates. He stands in his Manhattan office looking away from the docks and the harbors that made him a multimillionaire. He looks inland. He studies the chaotic, fragmented, and wildly mismanaged network of iron rails spreading across the American landscape. He realizes with absolute clarity that the era of the steamboat is entering its twilight. The future of American empire is not water. It is iron. But Vanderbilt does not plan to build railroads. Building requires patience, collaboration, and a willingness to share a landscape. The Commodore does not share. His strategy is far more predatory. He waits for other men to take the financial risk of laying the tracks, and then he waits for them to mismanage the companies. When the companies are weak, bleeding cash, and vulnerable, he strikes. His first target is the New York and Harlem Railroad. It is a complete disaster. It is known on Wall Street as a financial joke. The trains are filthy, constantly derailing, and running hours behind schedule. The stock is practically worthless. So why does the richest man in America want it? Because he sees the hidden leverage. The Harlem line possesses something no other railroad has: the exclusive, legally protected right to run its tracks straight down 4th Avenue, directly into the heart of Manhattan. It is a strategic choke point. If you control the Harlem, you control the only iron artery into the most important city in the country. Vanderbilt quietly begins buying up the worthless stock. He invests in new engines, repairs the tracks, and aggressively improves the service. The stock price begins to rise, and this is where the political rot of New York City attempts to challenge the Komodo. Re-died a cabal of corrupt city politicians, the notoriously greedy New York City aldermen. Notice the rising stock of the Harlem Railroad. They devise a highly illegal insider trading scheme to destroy Vanderbilt and enrich themselves. They approach Vanderbilt and offer to pass a city ordinance granting the Harlem line the right to extend its tracks all the way down to the Battery. The moment the ordinance is passed, the stock price predictably skyrockets. Then the politicians execute the trap. They engage in a massive short-selling campaign. In simple terms, they borrow thousands of shares of Vanderbilt stock and sell them at the high price, betting that the price is about to crash. Once they have placed their bets, they use their political power to suddenly repeal the very ordinance they just passed. It is a classic, brutal Wall Street ambush. They intend to artificially trigger a panic, crash the stock to pennies, buy it back at the bottom to cover their borrowed shares, and pocket millions in the difference. They believe they have completely outsmarted an old steamboat captain. They fundamentally misunderstand his psychology. When Vanderbilt realizes he has been set up, his fury is instant. The aldermen have not just tried to steal his money, they have tried to make him look foolish. They have attempted to subjugate him using the machinery of local government. Bypassing panic in the press, he immediately went to war. He possesses something the politicians desperately lack: a terrifying amount of highly liquid personal cash. Instead of selling his shares in a panic as the politicians expected, Vanderbilt uses his vast fortune to quietly buy every single share of the Harlem Railroad that the politicians are shorting. He buys and he buys and he buys until he has entirely cornered the market. He essentially purchases the entire supply of the stock. When the time comes for the politicians to return the shares they borrowed, they look at the market and realize there are O shares available to buy. Cornelius Vanderbilt owns them all. The politicians are trapped. They are legally obligated to buy the stock back, and Vanderbilt is the only man selling it. He sets the price. He drives the stock from $100 a share to nearly $280. The corrupt aldermen are financially obliterated. They are forced to liquidate their homes, their estates, and their secret bank accounts just to meet the Commodore's extortionate demands. They come to his office sweating, humiliated, begging the old man for mercy. Vanderbilt sits behind his desk, chewing his tobacco, his face a mask of cold, unyielding stone. He offers no mercy. He ruins them completely. He repeats this exact same maneuver a year later when the state legislature in Albany tries the same short-selling trick. He corners the market again, bankrupting members of the state assembly. He bypassed mere political victory. He forced the corrupt politicians to finance their own destruction. He proved that the political establishment of New York was entirely subservient to his personal capital. By the late 1860s, Vanderbilt controls the Harlem Line and the Hudson River Railroad, but there is a massive obstacle standing between him and absolute supremacy. The New York Central Railroad. The New York Central is a massive, wealthy conglomerate that controls the critical route from Albany to Buffalo. It is the gateway to the American West. Vanderbilt needs it to complete his monopoly. But the aristocratic board of directors of the New York Central refuse to sell to him. They view him as a vulgar, uneducated dock worker. To keep him in his place, they suddenly break a long-standing agreement, refusing to transfer their passengers and freight onto Vanderbilt's Hudson River trains during the harsh winter months. They expect Vanderbilt to sue them. They expect a long, drawn-out legal battle in the courts, where their expensive lawyers can stall him for years. Instead, Vanderbilt executes an act of profound, terrifying cruelty. It is January 1867, the heart of a brutal New York winter. The Hudson River is frozen solid. There are no steamboats running. The only way for the New York Central's passengers and freight to reach Manhattan from Albany is to transfer onto Vanderbilt's trains at the Albany Bridge. Without warning, Vanderbilt orders his trains to stop 2 miles short of the bridge. He completely severs the connection. He does not care that thousands of innocent passengers, men, women, and children, are suddenly dumped into the freezing snow in the middle of nowhere. He does not care that thousands of tons of vital freight, food, and supplies meant for New York City are left rotting and freezing in rail cars. He weaponizes the deadly winter weather to inflict maximum suffering. He intentionally paralyzes the economy of the entire state of New York. The public outcry is deafening. The press labels him a tyrant. The New York State Legislature immediately summons Vanderbilt to a special investigative hearing. In the hearing room, the politicians demand to know how he could dare to hold the entire public hostage. They cite the laws of the state, reminding him of his duty to the public good. Vanderbilt stares back at them with absolute, unapologetic contempt. When asked why he stopped the trains, he does not offer a legal defense. He answers with a chilling, arrogant simplicity, "I was not going to be driven." When asked about the laws of the state, he reportedly sneers, "Law? What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power?" The sheer audacity of his ruthlessness breaks the board of the New York Central. The public pressure, the frozen freight, and the crashing stock price are too much for them to bear. They surrender completely. In a matter of months, they hand over control of the massive New York Central to Cornelius Vanderbilt. He now controls the greatest railway empire on the face of the earth. He has an absolute monopoly over the iron arteries of the American Northeast, and because he has conquered the physical landscape, he demands a physical monument to his victory. He does not want a plaque or a subtle tribute. He requires a staggering, unavoidable manifestation of his ego. In 1869, He purchases a massive plot of land in the center of Manhattan at 42nd Street. He orders the construction of the Grand Central Depot. It is not merely a train station. It is an architectural declaration of supreme, unquestioned power. It features a massive glass and iron train shed that is the largest interior space in North America. The facade is a towering, intimidating structure of brick and granite, crowned with French Second Empire mansard roofs. It is designed to make every single human being who walks through its doors feel impossibly small. And high upon the southern facade, overlooking the city he has conquered, he orders the installation of a massive bronze statue. It is not a statue of a president or a general or a saint. It is a gargantuan, imposing bronze statue of Cornelius Vanderbilt himself. He forces the millions of passengers who rely on his trains to literally look up to him as their undisputed master. He is 77 years old. He has crushed the steamboat monopolies. He has broken the politicians. He has institutionalized his family members to maintain absolute silence at home. He sits at the pinnacle of American capitalism, completely untouchable. But up to this point, he has only fought men who abide by some semblance of logic, fear, and public shame. While the Commodore is busy casting his legacy in bronze at Grand Central, a new breed of predator is watching him from the shadows of Wall Street. These are men who do not care about public opinion. They do not care about the law. And they are not afraid of Cornelius Vanderbilt. They are waiting for him at the Erie Railway. And they are about to drag the old tyrant into the most chaotic, humiliating, and devastating battle of his entire life. In 1868, a 74-year-old Titan sat in his New York headquarters surveying an empire of iron. He controls the New York Central, the Hudson River, and the Harlem Railroad lines. He has an absolute suffocating monopoly over all rail traffic entering Manhattan from the north. But there is one glaring hole in his map, one line that stubbornly refuses to submit to his authority: the Erie Railway. The Erie connects the Hudson River to Lake Erie. It is a massive, highly lucrative freight artery. On Wall Street, it is notoriously referred to as the Scarlet Woman of Wall Street because it is wildly mismanaged, deeply corrupt, and constantly manipulated by its directors. Vanderbilt looks at the Erie and decides it is time to clean it up. He intends to buy it, integrate it into his massive network, and become the undisputed monopolistic dictator of the entire American railway system. He assumes this will be exactly like his previous conquests. He will use his massive cash reserves to aggressively buy up Erie stock, corner the market, and force the current directors to surrender. But Vanderbilt makes a critical miscalculation. Up to this point, he has fought arrogant aristocrats and corrupt, cowardly politicians. He has never fought men who are just as sociopathic, just as ruthless, and entirely unburdened by any sense of public shame as he is. He is about to go to war with the Erie Ring: Daniel Drew, Jim Fisk, and Jay Gould. Daniel Drew is the treasurer of the Erie, a treacherous, hyper-religious former cattle drover who invented the concept of watered stock. He literally used to feed his cattle salt and let them gorge on water right before weighing them for sale. Jim Fisk is a flamboyant, deeply cynical showman who treats Wall Street like a circus. But the true danger is Jay Gould. Gould is a cold, calculating financial genius. He is quiet, physically frail, and possesses an intellect entirely driven by cold, calculating pragmatism. Vanderbilt begins his assault. He quietly ashes his brokers onto the floor of the stock exchange, buying every share of Erie stock they can find. The price steadily climbs. Vanderbilt is pouring millions of dollars into the market, tightening the noose. He waits for the moment when Drew, Fisk, and Gould are trapped, forced to buy shares from him at extortionate prices. But the plot twist is not that they outsmart his buying strategy. The plot twist is that they completely change the physical rules of the game. Gould and Fisk do not try to buy stock to counter him. Instead, they retreat to the basement of the Erie headquarters. They purchase a massive industrial printing press, and they simply turn it on. They begin illegally printing thousands upon thousands of brand new, completely unbacked, unauthorized share certificates of the Erie Railway. They are creating fake equity out of thin air. They bundle these freshly printed certificates, hand them to their brokers, and flood the Wall Street floor with them. Vanderbilt's brokers keep buying. The printing press keeps running. The physical manifestation of this financial slaughter is staggering. Messengers run through the streets of Manhattan carrying literal baskets overflowing with crisp, freshly printed Erie certificates, dumping them onto the market. In a matter of days, Cornelius Vanderbilt buys 100,000 shares of illegal stock. He hemorrhages $7 million in cash, a sum that could fund a small nation. He finally realizes that the paper he is holding is entirely worthless. The market is saturated. The Erie ring has stolen his millions and diluted his control to nothing. The gap between his public persona and his inner reality is massive. New York society sees the great Commodore humiliated. The newspapers mock him. They paint him as an aging, out-of-touch dinosaur who was finally swindled by a new generation of sharper, faster predators. But inside the Washington Square mansion, Vanderbilt is not feeling defeat. He is feeling a terrifying volcanic rage. His absolute refusal to be made a victim takes complete control of his psychology. He does not accept the loss. He does not retreat to lick his wounds. His next move would expose the fundamental rot of the American justice system, turning it into his own personal weapon. He does not file a standard civil lawsuit. He goes shopping for a judge. He finds New York Supreme Court Judge George G. Barnard. Barnard is notoriously corrupt, a key figure in the Tammany Hall political machine. Vanderbilt essentially purchases the judge outright. He orders Judge Barnard to issue immediate warrants for the arrest of Daniel Drew, Jim Fisk, and Jay Gould on charges of contempt and illegal stock manipulation. He uses the New York police force as his own private collection agency. The Erie ring receives word that the police are coming with iron shackles. They grab suitcases, physically stuffing them with the $7 million of Vanderbilt's cash, and they sprint for the Hudson River ferries. They flee across the water to Jersey City, New Jersey, placing themselves entirely outside the legal jurisdiction of the New York courts. The physical reality of their exile is deeply absurd and dramatic. The Erie ring takes over the Taylor Hotel in Jersey City. They rename it Fort Taylor. Jim Fisk, reveling in the chaos, actually mounts cannons on the docks pointing back toward Manhattan. They hire dozens of armed thugs and bribe the local New Jersey police chief to establish a perimeter around the hotel. They sit in the dining room drinking expensive champagne, mocking the Commodore from across the river, heavily guarded by a private militia. Vanderbilt is blocked by a state line, but he does not stop. If the courts cannot reach them, he will use a different weapon. He turns his attention to the state legislature in Albany. He sends his agents to the state capitol with clear instructions. Bribe the state senators to pass a law permanently criminalizing the fake Erie stock and forms. Forcing the Erie ring out of power But Jay Gould anticipates this. Gould packs a valise with $500,000 of Vanderbilt's own money, sneaks out of Fort Taylor, and takes a train to Albany. What follows is one of the most grotesque, openly corrupt political spectacles in the history of the United States. The legislative halls of Albany become an open auction house. Jay Gould walks the corridors, literally handing out thick stacks of $1,000 bills to state senators, paying them to legalize the printed stock. Vanderbilt's agents walk down the exact same corridors, handing out cash to the exact same politicians, paying them to outlaw it. The senators play the two billionaires against each other. The price of a single politician's vote skyrockets from $1,000 to $15,000 in a matter of days. Lawmakers are taking money from Gould in the morning and from Vanderbilt in the afternoon. Cornelius Vanderbilt did not invent political corruption, but he industrialized it. By treating the law strictly as a commodity to be bought and sold, he completely broke the legislative integrity of New York State. He proved to the American public that justice was an illusion, entirely subservient to the demands of capital. The stalemate drags on for months. Millions of dollars are being burned in legal fees and bribes. Vanderbilt, ever the cold pragmatist, realizes that a prolonged war of attrition is bad for the entire railroad market. The volatility is scaring away European investors. He recognizes that Gould and Fisk will never surrender the Erie Railway. They would rather burn it to the ground. So, he executes a quiet, ruthless pivot. He does not need the Erie Railway. He just needs to cure his fatal weakness. He needs to erase the humiliation of being robbed. He sends a secret message across the river to Daniel Drew. He bypasses the lawyers and the judges entirely. He summons the old treasurer to a clandestine late-night meeting at his washy Ongton Square mansion. The details of the settlement are brutal and strictly financial. Vanderbilt drops the arrest warrants and calls off the judges. He allows the Erie Ring to keep their legal control of the railway, but in exchange, he forces them to buy back the worthless stock they sold him, completely reimbursing his massive financial losses. Furthermore, he forces them to pay him a massive cash bonus over $1 million, simply to cover the cost of his bribes and legal fees. The Erie Ring agrees. They raid the treasury of their own company to pay off the Commodore, leaving the Erie Railway completely bankrupt and physically decaying. The public never fully understands the secret settlement. Wall Street assumes the Erie Ring fought the great Commodore to a draw, but the financial reality is that Vanderbilt forced his enemies to empty their own pockets to make him whole. He did not win the railroad, but he maintained his absolute leverage. He proved that even if you outsmart him, even if you steal millions, he will bend the entire political and legal framework of the state until you hand it back. He is now in his mid-70s. The Erie War is over. He sits atop a mountain of wealth that defies human comprehension, an estimated $100 million. He has crushed all physical and financial opposition, fighting men of flesh and blood who could be intimidated, bribed, or ruined. But the Commodore is about to wage a war he cannot win. The years of chewing tobacco, intense stress, and a reckless, disease-ridden youth on the docks are finally catching up to him. The iron body is beginning to fail. As his physical dominance crumbles, his terrifying psychological fortress begins to crack. He is about to face an enemy that cannot be bribed, intimidated, or crushed in the stock market. An enemy that will drag the most ruthless man in America down into a pathetic, humiliating world of charlatans and ghosts. His own biology, the terrifying collapse of his mind, in oldie. Age was directly rooted in the physical brutality of his youth. He grew up on the brutal, unregulated docks of the early 19th century. He spent his formative years in the waterfront brothels of New York and Staten Island. Many historians suggest he suffered from neurosyphilis, a devastating infection rooted in his brutal waterfront youth that slowly eats away at the central nervous system. The towering, barrel-chested titan begins to shrink. The man who used his sheer physical mass to force older men to step back on the docks now suffers from severe tremors. His heart begins to fail. His bowels become chronically inflamed. But the most terrifying symptoms are neurological. He experiences violent, unpredictable mood swings. He is consumed by profound paranoia, convinced that his servants are stealing from him and his children are plotting his murder. His deep pathological terror of appearing vulnerable is triggered on a daily basis. He knows his body is failing, and he knows that on Wall Street, physical weakness is blood in the water. He cannot allow the public to see the great Commodore trembling, so he locks himself inside his sprawling Washington Square mansion. He transforms his home from a headquarters of industry into a heavily guarded quarantine zone. Cornelius Vanderbilt is the ultimate pragmatist. Throughout his life, he openly mocked religion. He refused to attend church. He told ministers that his only religion was the almighty dollar. He only believed in things he could physically touch, control, and monetize: steam engines, iron rails, and cold, hard currency. But as his brain deteriorates and the shadow of death creeps over his bed, his psychology violently fractures. He realizes for the first time in his existence that he is facing a force he cannot subjugate. He cannot buy off death. So in a desperate, delusional attempt to maintain his leverage, the supreme capitalist abandons logic entirely. He turns to the occult. He becomes obsessed with ritualism. In the 1870s, spiritualism is sweeping across America, promising communication with the dead through seances, mediums, and magnetic healing. To a rational mind, it is a parlor trick. To a terrified, dying tyrant losing control of his cognitive faculties, it is a lifeline. Vanderbilt believes that if he can communicate with the dead, he can outsmart mortality itself. He can exert his dominance over the afterlife. Vanderbilt opens the doors of his heavily fortified mansion to two of the most notorious, eccentric figures of the era, the sisters Victoria Woodhull and Tennessee Claflin. They are spiritual mediums, magnetic healers, and radical free love advocates. To the high society of New York, they are scandalous charlatans. To the Commodore, they are essential personnel. Vanderbilt allows Tennessee Claflin, an attractive woman nearly 50 years his junior, to place her hands on his body for magnetic massages to cure his failing heart and bowels. He sits in darkened rooms with the sisters, listening to disembodied knocks and table rappings. His belief in their parlor tricks was bizarre, but his exercise of immense financial power to legitimize them was staggering. Because he believes Tennessee possesses genuine spiritual power, Vanderbilt essentially sponsors the sisters on Wall Street. He provides the financial backing for them to open Woodhull, Claflin and Company, making them the very first female stockbrokers in American history. The richest man in the world is taking financial advice from ghosts, channeled through two sisters who claim to hear spirits. The image is grotesque. The man who mercilessly ruined politicians and rival businessmen is now a frail old man, sitting in his parlor, willingly being manipulated by spiritualist mediums. But the tragedy deepens when you look at exactly who Vanderbilt is trying to contact in these darkened rooms. He demands that the medium summon the spirit of his late wife, Sophia. the very woman he verbally abused for 30 years, the woman he had forcibly dragged from her home and locked inside the Bloomingdale insane asylum to silence her protests against his infidelity. Does he summon her spirit to ask for her forgiveness? Absolutely not. The Commodore does not apologize, not even to the dead. He summons Sophia because he genuinely believes her ghost can provide him with insider trading tips from the spirit world. He continues to treat her as an exploitable asset from beyond the grave. But there is another spirit he seeks, and this reveals the only genuine crack in his iron armor. He begs the mediums to connect him with George Washington Vanderbilt. George was his youngest son. He was tall, athletic, brilliant, and possessed the exact commanding presence the Commodore demanded in an heir. George was the only human being on earth that Cornelius Vanderbilt truly, unconditionally loved. But George died in 1864, contracting tuberculosis while serving in the military during the Civil War era. When George died, Vanderbilt's reaction was terrifying. The man who never showed a shred of empathy wept openly, sobbing with a ferocity that shocked his family. Now in the 1870s, as his mind rots from disease, the tyrant sits at the seance table and cries out for his dead boy. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn. The room is pitch black except for a single candle. The great Commodore, his hands shaking violently, leans over a wooden table, pleading into the empty air, waiting for a charlatan medium to mimic the voice of his favorite son. His grief was profoundly and singularly selfish. While Vanderbilt wept for a ghost in a dark room, his living children were right outside the door. He still actively despised his eldest son, William Henry, treating him like a dim-witted servant. He still actively tortured Cornel, the epileptic son he had thrown into the insane asylum, keeping him on a starvation allowance and refusing to look him in the eye. Vanderbilt poured his entire capacity for human emotion then to a corpse, leaving absolutely nothing for the children who were actually breathing. His physical decay accelerates. He becomes bedridden. He surrounds himself with quack doctors and bizarre medical treatments. He places small bowls of salt under his bedposts, convinced it will ward off evil spirits and draw the disease out of his body. He demands that a medium sleep in the room next to him to protect him from unseen forces. The public perception is carefully managed. William Henry, acting as the loyal, obedient dog, guards the front door of the mansion. He issues press releases stating that the Commodore is simply resting, maintaining the illusion of the Iron Patriarch. But inside the bedroom, the Patriarch is screaming at shadows. While mediums and doctors crowded his bedroom, the true predators paced the hallways. His children, his daughters, who have been treated as nothing more than bargaining chips. Cornel, who has been humiliated and institutionalized. And William Henry, the blockhead, who has silently endured decades of verbal abuse. They are all watching his breathing become shallow. They are not waiting for a miraculous recovery. They are waiting for the reading of the will. Vanderbilt is nearing his final breath. He has $100 million to distribute, and the final document he is about to sign will be his ultimate act of control from beyond the grave. It will be a document so breathtakingly cruel, so profoundly vindictive, that it will ignite a legal war that will tear his family to shreds and drag every single dark, hidden secret of the Washington Square mansion directly into the glaring light of the public courtroom. In January 1877, a bitter cold gripped New York City. Inside the sprawling, heavily fortified Washington Square mansion, The iron machinery of Cornelius Vanderbilt's body finally grinds to a complete, agonizing halt. For weeks, the Commodore has been trapped in his bed, his once massive frame ravaged by severe intestinal inflammation and the suspected neurological decay of late-stage syphilis. The man who dictated the flow of American commerce is reduced to a frail, trembling figure. He demands that his servants and his young second wife sing religious hymns to him, specifically asking for, "Come, ye sinners, poor and needy." It is a bizarre, deeply hypocritical final soundtrack for a man who spent 8 decades acting as a merciless financial predator. On the morning of January 4th, 1877, the Commodore takes his final breath. He is 82 years old. Instantly, the solemn mourning of the family evaporates, replaced by a suffocating, terrifying tension. The patriarch is dead. The dictator has fallen. And left sitting on the table is an empire valued at $100 million. In the post-Civil War era, this is a sum of money so unimaginably vast that it represents more cash than is held in the entire United States Treasury at the time. The family gathers for the reading of the will. They sit in the parlor dressed in heavy black mourning clothes, waiting to hear how the great Commodore has valued their lives. For the Commodore, a will was never a vehicle for providing comfort to his loved ones. It was his ultimate weapon of control. He knew he could not take his money with him, but he was absolutely determined to maintain his leverage from beyond the grave. He was terrified that his empire, the physical manifestation of his ego, would be chopped into small, weak pieces and scattered among his heirs. The lawyer breaks the seal and reads the document. It is a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. Cornelius Vanderbilt leaves roughly $95 million along with absolute controlling interest in the New York Central Railroad monopoly to one person, his eldest son, William Henry. This is the very son Vanderbilt had openly mocked for decades. The son he called a blockhead and banished to a Staten Island farm because he believed the boy lacked the killer instinct. But Vanderbilt's fatal weakness, his terror of his empire collapsing, overrode his personal contempt. He did not leave the money to William Henry out of paternal love. He left it to him because William Henry had spent 50 years proving he was a completely submissive, obedient vessel. William Henry was the only person Vanderbilt trusted to act as a static vault, a man who would simply hold the monopoly together without daring to challenge his dead father's blueprint. The rest of the family is financially slaughtered. Vanderbilt leaves his 8 surviving daughters between $250,000 to $500,000 each. In modern terms, that is still a fortune, but in the context of a $100 million estate, it is less than half of 1%. It is the financial equivalent of sweeping crumbs off a banquet table. He actively ensures that the women of his family will have absolutely no influence over the American economy. But the true surgical strike of the Commodore's cruelty is reserved for his second son, Cornelius Jeremiah. Cornel, the brilliant but epileptic son. The boy Vanderbilt had twice dragged into the Bloomingdale insane asylum to crush his rebellious spirit. Vanderbilt does not leave Cornel a lump sum of money. He leaves him the income from a $200,000 trust fund. The mechanics of this financial prison are highly calculated. A trust fund means Cornel does not actually own the principal. He is only allowed to receive the interest it generates. And the conditions attached to this trust are humiliating. The money is to be strictly managed, heavily monitored, and doled out like an allowance to a child. The Commodore is dead, but he has constructed a financial prison specifically designed to keep his son in a state of permanent, degrading subjugation. The reading of the will concludes. William Henry sits in silence, possessing a fortune that makes him the richest man on the globe. The daughters are furious, but Cornel is completely shattered. The father who despised him in life has managed to formally, legally brand him as an incompetent failure in death. For a few months, the family simmers in toxic resentment, and then the dam breaks. Cornel, joined by his sisters Mary Alicia and Ethelinda, decides to strike back. They do not accept the scraps. In November 1877, they formally contest the will in the New York Surrogate's court. Their legal argument is explosive. They claim that Cornelius Vanderbilt was of unsound mind when he drafted the document, and that he was the victim of undue influence exerted by William Henry and a cadre of spiritualist mediums. What follows is the trial of the century. It is a legal spectacle that completely paralyzes New York City and captures the attention of the entire nation. Up to this point, the Vanderbilt name represented unquestioned industrial majesty. The public only knew the soaring glass arches of Grand Central Depot and the relentless efficiency of the steamboats. The dark sociopathic reality of the Washington Square mansion had been kept firmly behind locked mahogany doors. The lawsuit violently kicks those doors open. The courtroom is a physical theater of humiliation. It is packed to the rafters with sweating journalists, rival Wall Street bankers, and common laborers, all hungry to watch the aristocracy bleed. The issue isn't just about a disputed contract. The issue is the systematic public dissection of a tyrant. For over a year, the trial drags on. Witness after witness takes the stand under oath, and piece by piece, the pristine Vanderbilt legacy is torn to shreds. The lawyers put the Commodore's doctors on the stand. They testify to his physical decay, his violent mood swings, and his terrifying bouts of paranoia. The lawyers subpoena the servants. The maids and butlers stand before the packed gallery and describe the richest man in America, trembling in his bed, demanding that they place bowls of salt under the bedpost to ward off demonic spirit. Then the spiritualists take the stand. The public gasps as the courtroom hears the verified details of the seances. They hear how the great Commodore sat in pitch-black rooms, paying charlatans to channel the ghosts of his dead wife and his favorite son. The public learns that the man who held the American economy hostage actually believed he could receive insider trading tips from the afterlife. The gap between how the public perceived him and his inner reality is completely obliterated. The titan of industry is exposed as a pathetic, deeply superstitious, and mentally unstable old man. But the most devastating moment of the trial is when the lawyers drag the darkest family secret of all into the public record. The insane asylums. The public learns in horrifying detail how the Commodore utilized the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum as a private domestic prison. They hear how he locked up his completely sane wife, Sophia, simply because she refused to move into a new house. They hear how he locked up his son, Cornel, to punish him for his gambling debts and his epilepsy. The medical ledgers are exposed. The bribery is heavily implied. The contradiction is grotesque. The man hailed as the ultimate builder of American infrastructure is revealed to have actively dismantled the minds of his own family members. The Vanderbilt name becomes a national punchline. Newspapers publish vicious political cartoons depicting the Commodore as a deranged lunatic talking to ghosts while sitting on a pile of gold. William Henry sits in the courtroom every single day, enduring this relentless, excruciating public humiliation. He watches his father's reputation be dragged through the mud, But William Henry possesses the exact trait his father valued most: cold, unfeeling pragmatism. He realizes that the longer the trial goes on, the more damage it does to the stock price of the New York Central Railroad. The exposure of the family's dirty laundry is beginning to threaten the actual physical empire. So, William Henry executes a calculated clinical maneuver to stop the bleeding. In 1879, he approaches Cornelius and his sisters behind closed doors and offers a secret settlement. He does not offer it out of familial guilt. He offers it strictly as a business expense to silence them. He agrees to give Cornelius an additional $1 million in cash, free from the humiliating constraints of the trust fund. He gives his sisters an additional $500,000 each. In exchange, they must immediately drop the lawsuit, validate the original will, and never speak of the matter again. The siblings, exhausted and recognizing that William Henry's endless legal funds could stall them in court for decades, accept the settlement. The trial of the century ends abruptly. William Henry retains absolute control of the $95 million empire. He has successfully defended the fortress. The human cost of this legal victory is catastrophic. Cornelius takes his $1 million, but the money cannot cure the profound psychological damage inflicted by a lifetime of paternal abuse. He has spent 50 years being told he is a defective failure, being locked in psychiatric wards, and being publicly humiliated in the surrogate's court. He descends deeper into gambling and severe depression. In 1882, just a few years after the trial concludes, Cornelius checks into a room at the Glenham Hotel on Fifth Avenue. He is 51 years old. He sits on the edge of the bed, entirely consumed by the absolute darkness his father planted in his mind decades earlier. He pulls out a Smith & Wesson revolver, places it to his right temple, and pulls the trigger. The bullet ends his life instantly. It is the tragic, inevitable conclusion of the Commodore's $0 war on his own bloodline. Vanderbilt's need for total dominance ultimately drove his son to self-execution. William Henry now stands completely alone at the summit of American wealth. He has the railroads, he has the money, and he has successfully swept the corpses of his family's dignity under the rug. He believes that the storm has passed. He believes that the Vanderbilt Empire is now an eternal, indestructible monument that will rule the American economy for centuries to come. But the plot twist is arriving with terrifying speed. William Henry fails to understand a fundamental law of human nature. The Commodore built the empire using sheer psychopathic aggression. He maintained it through absolute terror, but he left that unimaginable wealth to a generation of heirs who have absolutely no idea how to build, only how to spend. The money is finally unlocked, and the descendants are about to unleash a tidal wave of vanity, gluttony, and reckless extravagance that will shock the world. The history of the Vanderbilts now shifts from a dark psychological thriller into a spectacular, self-inflicted financial apocalypse. The greatest fortune in human history is about to be vaporized. William Henry Vanderbilt actually doubled the inheritance. For 8 years following the trial of the century, the eldest son acted as a dutiful, hyper-vigilant manager of his father's monopoly. He pushed the family fortune to nearly $200 million, but the psychological stress of maintaining the Commodore's iron grip was lethal. In 1885, William Henry collapsed and died of a stroke, and with his death the vault finally bursts open. The third generation takes over. These descendants did not inherit the Commodore's predatory genius, but they absolutely inherited his desperate need to prove absolute superiority. The difference lies entirely in the execution. Instead of destroying rival businesses, his grandchildren destroy their own bank accounts in a desperate bid for social supremacy. They launch a reckless architectural arms race, constructing staggering, unsustainable palaces like the Breakers and the 250-room Biltmore estate. In a grotesque contradiction, they trade cold, hard American industrial capital to buy meaningless, decaying European titles for their daughters, actively striving to become the exact parasitic class their grandfather spent his life crushing. Then the 20th century arrives, federal income taxes and the Great Depression strike. The iron railroad monopoly shatters as automobiles and airplanes rise. The descendants, entirely lacking the Commodore's cutthroat adaptability, simply continue to spend. By the 1940s, the magnificent Fifth Avenue chateaus are boarded up, demolished, or turned into tourist attractions just to keep the heat on. When the Vanderbilt family holds a reunion in 1973, gathering 120 descendants, the collective financial supremacy of the House of Vanderbilt had completely disintegrated. The greatest concentration of wealth in human history evaporated in exactly the time it takes for a memory to fade. Cornelius Vanderbilt's legacy is a massive moral debt. He laid the iron tracks that united a fractured continent, creating the physical foundation of the modern American economy. The nation reaped the immense benefits of his brutal efficiency. Yet today, as his towering bronze statue looks down upon the commuters at Grand Central Terminal, it hides the psychological wreckage of his own bloodline. He built an indestructible physical empire, but his ultimate legacy proved that a dynasty built entirely on the fear of weakness will inevitably collapse under the weight of its own vanity.